All right, here we go. Let me go ahead and share the screen. Hi, Veronica. Thank you for joining us. And let's see. All right. Well, with that being said, oh, somebody else. There we go. Wonderful. Thank you for joining us, Micheline and Natasha. Okay, I'll give it just another minute so that we don't get started and have others waiting. All right. All right. Well, with that being said, we're talking today about writing a powerful ATAC amendment to address concerns. Obviously, that is something that we all have had to do at one point or another. Natalie shared that the number one issue she's had has been the fact that the sending it almost at midnight, and then you run into an issue where it becomes where the other agent doesn't want to work with you, right? And that is definitely a common problem. Before I go ahead and hit the next screen, can you guys see the screen okay? If not, you make sure you let me know. Anybody that wants to jump in and discuss it, thinks I'm going too fast or has a question, please make sure to stop me. This is being recorded, and I'll show you where to access the recordings in just a moment, or at the end of the presentation. But writing a powerful ATAC, let's talk about the 3 times in an offer that we have to negotiate. I'm sure you guys are all aware that we have 3 times to negotiate during a contract to close, right? What are those 3 times?
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. Yeah, and jump in. I love when you guys jump in. This is supposed to be interactive. So yes, we have the offer, we have the inspections, and we have the appraisal. In a balanced market, we will always, and also frequently in a seller's market, properties are basically sold twice, right? The original offer and acceptance, and then the renegotiation that follows the inspection report. For those of you that are just joining us, you haven't lost anything. We're just getting started. Welcome, Shauna. Welcome, Cheryl. And make sure that you jump in at any point in time. So we have those 3 times, but I do ask that you keep yourselves muted if you're on any phone calls or anything like that. We want to set proper expectations before you ever get started with the inspection report. Make sure that you set the proper expectations. We know that there isn't a single house that's perfect, not even new construction. So make sure that when you're having your conversations with your buyer, that you set that stage so that the buyer not only understands the inspection process, but has the proper expectation to the inspection process. And make sure that you're looking at the big picture, or teach them to look at the big picture. If expectations were properly set, then the buyer shouldn't expect that every single repair be made, right? Because we know that the buyers look at the house as Taj Mahal, or what they want the house to be like, right? But then every single little repair becomes what? A major issue, right? Hi, Rosanna. Haven't seen you in a while. Yolanda, welcome. So make sure those expectations are properly set so that they don't become deal killers, right? And sit with your client. Ask them before you start the inspection process, what is an actual deal killer? We're going to get into the actual writing of the inspection report in a moment, but it's very important to understand what needs to happen prior in order to achieve the most powerful ATAC. So you want to sit with the client, ask what those actual deal killers are. Ask this before the inspection, not after, right? What would be an absolute deal killer? Would it be mold? Would it be polybutylene? Would it be, I don't know, a roof issue? Whatever. We know that every single buyer is different. So we want to make sure that we're asking those questions, and also understand who the buyer is. Is your buyer a first time home buyer? Is it a nervous Nelly buyer, right? Is it an investor who could care less as long as it has 4 walls and a roof? Make sure you understand that. Is it a handyman? Perhaps it's somebody that actually wants more issues to happen so that the price goes down because they can repair it anyway. Just understand who that buyer is. And then once you understand who the buyer is, also understand who the seller is, because understanding where did that seller come from? Of course, during your negotiation process, you're going to have hopefully found out what the motivation of the seller was. But did the seller really accept maybe a low offer in their mind, right? Are you aware of the seller's motivation? Is it a divorce situation? Is it an estate? What is the situation as to why they're selling? Where is that seller coming from? Understanding that psychology behind the sale is going to help you when you write your ATAC. Because we also need to know, does the seller even have the ability to make repairs?
Yeah.
Is it a hot market? You know, if we're in a hot market, then make sure that you understand that perhaps you've got to explain to your buyer, we're going to ask for things, but you might not get them, right? And then the next question that I always get is, should I be at the inspection itself? With a virtual hand being put up, you guys all should know how to do your virtual hands. Go ahead and tell me if you're usually at the inspection. Anybody? Are you guys usually at the inspection? Put your hand up if you are. Yes, hands up, virtual hands. Okay. Well, I'm not getting too many hands. That's interesting. I would have really expected that more of you guys would have been, but that's okay. I will tell you, I don't usually go to the inspection. And it's going to obviously depend on the buyer, but understanding to be there or not to be there is going to be part of your business plan. Understanding the buyer. If the buyer is going to insist on being there, then I'll probably be there. But I usually tell the buyer to just rely on the inspection report. But that is a personal decision. For me, I prefer to not. And the reason, I'll tell you the reason why I don't go is I'm not an inspector. I'm not a handyman. I don't want to try to step in and give an opinion that could actually impede the process instead of helping the process. You guys can put your hands down, by the way, unless you want to, somebody share with me why you go to the inspection report.
So, before I was virtual, so I was never used to going to any home inspections. And then the pandemic came when I got here, and then I still wasn't going. And then once we transitioned to normality or whatever that may be for each individual, if the client expressed that they would have to take off work, things like that, I would say that what the responsibility is of the home inspector, and that really us being there, he could miss something. I would explain those different things. So if it was an investor, I wasn't going. And if it was a home buyer who wanted to be there, then I would accompany them, because I can't account for if they would do something or go into different places of the person's home. I guess my question for you is there a liability if the inspector and the buyer go there alone without us?
No, absolutely not. Not that I know of. First of all, it is not your responsibility. They are first, and I know you were at the class where I said I never refer an inspector. I mean, I'll refer 3 inspectors,
Right.
but I never refer one. And so I prefer not to be there, because that is a transaction between them. Because we know what happens when the inspector does miss something. Then they're like, well, why didn't you point it out? Why didn't you tell them that? Why did you refer that inspector to me, et cetera? So I prefer keeping the liability of myself out of the picture. If they're there with them, with the inspector, that's on them. That's totally on them. I see Yolanda wrote some inspectors prefer you to be there to point out what can't really be explained in the report. If I know the inspector and I know my buyer, I might like emphasize that need, but most inspectors do that strictly as a service oriented situation, but it's up to you to decide whether the buyer wants to be there or not. I can tell you the majority of my buyers prefer not to be there anyway. They were always like, thank you. The report is good. I can figure it out from there. I will call the inspector and ask them to explain things to my buyer or myself if need be later, but I don't want to be, I want to stay out of their lane and stay in my lane, as well as if that house is, if they start explaining something that could really scare my buyer, I want to have all the facts before I explain it to them. Also, buyers tend to be, depending on the buyer may be following the inspector around to the point that the inspector is not even able to get their work done. Obviously, if they're going to go, I definitely recommend that they show up the last half hour of the inspection only. Now, Micheline, you wrote, I'd like my buyers to get to know the house. I don't feel that that's the time for them to get to know the house. And sometimes I have seen buyers actually really start freaking out when they go during the inspection. They start seeing all these nooks and crannies. They start seeing spider webs or whatever. The house is a mess because the sellers are moving. It just, to me, that is not the time for them to get to know the house. Again, that is a business decision that you guys have to make. I've been doing this since 1994. I've never had an issue. I'm not telling you I never go to the inspection, but it really depends on the buyer and who the inspector is. Some of these inspectors are deal killers and deal breakers. So I have to be very cautious as to how I set the expectations, right? So that's just a side note that I wanted to kind of discuss, because that's going to obviously go into how we write the inspection report. I mean, the ATAC. Mm-hmm.
So when the inspection report goes to your client, are you having them pick out the items of what they want? Are you going off of what the
Yes, we're going to discuss that in just a moment. But yes, the inspection itself, we're going to also make sure that we have read the seller's disclosure right before the inspection. I always provide that to the inspector. So if, for instance, there was a leak and they fixed it, we obviously are going to make sure that the inspector knows about it. Because they're going to, of course, your buyer's going to ask you, should I be worried about that? Well, I mentioned it to the inspector. You've done your due diligence by telling the inspector about it and giving them the seller's disclosure. Now, the report arrives, and we obviously are going to review the inspection. So this is where the first expectations that were set prior to the inspection itself are going to come in handy. I'm going to tell the buyer, let's look at everything. I usually direct them right to the summary page, depending on who the inspector was, right? I personally do not like the inspection reports that have cost on them, by the way. That's my own personal opinion. I feel that they're misleading, per se. A lot of them have their own companies that they like to suggest, which I find to be a conflict of interest, but that's my own opinion. Natalie, you have your hand raised. Is it for a specific reason?
It was that question.
Okay, no problem. So when we review the inspections, I make sure that I explain to them, okay, let's go to the summary page. Let's look at what's of most importance, because of course the buyer is going to immediately go to every single little detail, right? And so I try to get them to the most important details, and I'll tell them, I need you to review it. Tell me what is most concerning to you. I'm never going to give my opinion. Like, for instance, if they're freaking out about a GSI, oh my gosh, my husband's an electrician and I should know this, but the outlet. So if they're freaking out about that, about the ground fault, I may say GFI. I may say, we can discuss that. But that is something that, depending how handy my buyer is, it may be something they're going to do, right? Because a GFI costs about $8 for a really nice one if you know how to do it yourself. I'm one of those whose husband can do it themselves, but they might be somebody that can't. But again, I'm not going to put in my opinion going, oh, that's an easy fix. Please never do that, because for them, it might not be an easy fix. For them, it might be a major issue. So the first step I make is I explain to them to tell me what their biggest issue is. That way we can review it and discuss what is going to be of most importance to them. Then I'll explain to them, depending on what we know about the offer. Are there backup offers? Are we in a competitive market? Is this house in a really hot area? After we've already acknowledged all that and we know all that, I'll set the expectations once again. If we ask for too much, there's a possibility nothing will get done. If we ask for nothing, there's a possibility we missed an opportunity, right? So we're going to, I usually tell them, depending again on the market and all the items that I just mentioned, I usually tell them we can maybe ask for more than you really expect, but understand that we may not get it all done, right? But at least that way we can ask for it and see what they come back in return with. And then I want to make sure, now we're getting into the actual amendment. I want to make sure that the amendment speaks for itself. And what I mean by that, it has to be clear and concise. One of the biggest things that I see in amendment to address concerns is specificity. Oh my goodness, I can't say that word. So basically, okay, sorry. Gotcha. Sorry, I was reading a question and I'm going to answer it in just a moment. If they are not specific, we could run into issues, and we're going to look at some examples of that. Eddie had asked if the buyer is present at the inspection and the agent is not. The inspector is busy inspecting the home. The buyers are in the home unattended. If something goes wrong, isn't the agent responsible? We're not responsible for a buyer's actions, but I certainly would have told the listing agent, hey, I'm not going to be there. My buyers will be there. And I will let them know that. I will also preface with my buyers to not be just roaming around. Now, like I said, if my buyers are insisting on being there, I'll probably be there. I try not to be there, and I try that the buyer's not there either. But no, we would not be responsible as far as I know. We can't be responsible for what they do. But I would make sure to let the listing agent know that I wouldn't be there. Do not put in lieu of repairs, please. That is something that is a big red flag for underwriters and for lenders. Don't put in lieu of repairs. With that being said, you have to decide if what is more important. Are closing costs, contributions more important, or repairs? I usually explain to my buyers, if we ask them for repairs, the sellers are going to just do what they can to get it repaired. They don't really care I shouldn't say they don't really care, because they do, but they're not going to be living in the house after the repairs are done, right? So for them, unless they agree to use a repairman of your choice, which is going to be rare, I would rather get the closing cost contribution. Unless it's something that is going to be lender required, of course. But if it's something that can be done after the buyer moves in, I'll say, let's get the closing cost contribution. I make sure I always send an email about it, because I want them to understand this closing cost contribution is basically in lieu of repairs. I can say it to the buyer. I just don't want it on the amendment. And just remember that, so that 5 months from the time they move in, they say, I can't believe all these things are wrong with my house. You explain to them, well, remember, you received the closing cost contribution that was for that purpose. But it's for the purpose for them to either repair it themselves or for them to hire their own contractors. So again, that's one of the first questions I'll ask. Okay, we've decided what's most important to you, what items are of most concern. Are they items that you think you would like to hire somebody to repair, or are they items that you would prefer that they get done so that when you move in, they're done. Have that conversation with your buyer and then be specific. So once we decide what that answer is, we're going to write them very specifically. We're going to go into that in just a moment. We're going to use GAR F704 if there is a due diligence period. Understand that the right to request repairs is different than a due diligence period. That's a whole other class, so I'm not going to go into detail about that. But if you have due diligence, you're going to use GAR F704. If you negotiated right to request repairs instead of due diligence, then you would use either F722 or on the RE forms 262. You see, in RE forms, you really don't have due diligence per se. It's more of a right to request repairs. So be aware of that. That's one of the differences between the two forms as well. So make sure that that's the case. Again, as we talked about, and I repeat it again, I can't say it enough, be specific. So I'm going to show you some actual excerpts of some of the contracts that I have reviewed. Exposed roofing nails. Recommend HVAC contractor to check HVAC system. Would like floor braced. Possible visible mold. What do y'all think is wrong with those?
Did they copy that from the report?
Probably. But that is a description. That is not a request. So cautious when you correct, Shayna. No asking. There's no request there. Make sure that if you're copying from the report, that you're actually stating what needs to be done about those exposed roofing nails. Make sure that you ask what needs to be done once the HVAC contractor checks the HVAC. Exactly, Eddie. Too vague, nothing to get done. But we see that I'd say 90% of the contracts that I review are copied and pasted from the inspection reports and say exactly these items. These are actual items that I took out of contracts. So if it says exposed roofing nails, then perhaps the amendment to address concerns could say, inspector found exposed roofing nails. Buyer requests that seller have a roofer correct those exposed roofing nails and show proof of correction. Obviously better worded than that, but recommend HVAC contractor. Then, buyer requests that seller have the HVAC serviced and clearance letter provided along with receipt showing that, right? You get the idea. Would like floor braced. That's nice. Thank you for telling me that. Possible visible mold. Okay. Have mold, license, and well, they're not licensed, but have a mold remediation company inspect property and have mold remediated if found that there is truly mold, that type of thing. You get the idea. Now, keep in mind, and well, actually, I'm going to save that for a moment and I'll talk about that in a moment. Understand the FHA and the VA appraisers are not inspectors. That is another comment I hear all the time. Oh, I don't need an inspector, right? Because I'm going FHA or VA. Have you all ever heard that?
No.
That's good. I've heard it a million times. In the 30 years I've been doing this, I've heard it so often. Well, I was told I don't need an inspector because I'm going FHA. I'm glad you guys aren't hearing it. Maybe it's not being told as much because FHA and VA do obvious. Oh, see, Eddie says plenty of times. I think you and I must have been same time frames. Yolanda's heard it. Yeah, they seem to think that FHA, because FHA and VA appraisers are called, it's called an inspection when they do it, but it's not a home inspection. They're inspecting for specific things and items. So understand that they're not inspectors and do be aware of some of the things. Can somebody, some of you guys tell me what some of the items are that FHA and VA will call?
The dry rot around the windows
Dry rot around the windows. Yeah.
and the downspout, the plate that sits underneath the downspout.
Yeah. Those are definitely some items. Siding sometimes, FHA.
Yeah.
Railings, like the stair railings and stuff like that.
What about the stair railings? Eddie, the question is, what are some of the items that FHA and VA will call out that we probably have to get fixed before, even if you're asking for closing cost contributions, they have to get fixed for the appraiser not to call it. Fire alarm. Okay.
And trees, if the trees are touching any of the wires, that's gonna have to be cut back. for
Yeah.
limbs.
Those are all great items. Also, some of the other ones, no stove. Yeah, for sure. And that's a misconception that a lot of people have, that it's the refrigerator. It's the stove. FHA requires that there is a stove, not a refrigerator. Also, wood to dirt is a VA. Y'all understand what that means? No wood can be touching the dirt. So that's usually around the decks. FHA, if it's 36 inches or higher, the staircase, then there must be a stair rail. Yolanda had to put up retaining wall fence because of a drop off. Yeah, those are all items. If it's over 36 inches, they're going to require some sort of protection. Generally, VA is looking for safety items. I actually got called out one time. Yes, Eddie's correct. Deck not bolted to frame or not using a deck bolt. I was called out for a ripped carpet in a closet of all things, guys. But VA called it out because they felt it was a safety issue, that somebody's foot could hit that little area of the rug. So we had to do a re-inspect. We had to get that fixed and do a re-inspect. So VA is usually looking for safety. FHA 2 is also for safety, and then here's another misconception you hear all the time: FHA won't do it because it's an old roof. No, FHA is making sure that it's not leaking. So again, be aware of those things, but make sure you explain to your buyers that they are not inspectors. They are simply appraisers, even though it's called an inspection when they do it. So that is something very important to understand. Make sure you use special steps. Here are the special steps for due diligence and inspection. If you want to, well, you guys will have the PowerPoints anyway, but it's basically 302 to 334. Don't try to write your own steps, guys, when there is one already. Be sure to use the ones that are already there, written by attorneys. So that way you are protected. So these are all dealing with due diligence or inspection. Now, septic and sewer is another one. Don't just think that because public records tells you that it's a sewer, that it's not a septic. If you're in Gwinnett County, you can always look at their GSI system or GIS system, which is an online system. You can go to the Gwinnett County website and look it up, and you can see even where that septic is located. Now, here is something to make sure you're aware of as you're negotiating your ATAC. If there is a sewer connection, FHA is going to require that sewer connection get connected. I won't say is going to, but most likely will. So be aware that if the neighbor of the house that you're selling has sewer connected and that sewer is available, that is why that second page of the FHA exhibit states whose responsibility will it be to connect the sewer. Be very cautious and understand what that is, because it has to do with the sewer connection being available, and it's a costly connection. So I know we usually put 500 or 1,000. It's probably closer to 2,500 to 5,000 to actually connect it. Now, again, if they if they tell you that they have sewer, don't just trust it. Ask them if they have a water bill and a sanitation bill. That'll help you understand if they really have sewer. And make sure if it's Gwinnett County that you're checking it on the site. You can always call planning and zoning of whichever county you're in and confirm that. Because just because it says it on tax records or on the MLS, it does not mean that's the case. The other issue with the septic tank is that I'm always seeing, I won't say always, I'm constantly seeing septic tank to be pumped, period. Make sure you put septic tank to be pumped and inspected and a clearance letter provided by reputable septic tank company. Because also I've seen provide a septic clearance letter. That isn't enough, because what happens is there's a lot of companies that'll do a visual inspect, and it doesn't mean that they've really inspected the septic tank. So make sure you're putting that it's going to be pumped if it hasn't been pumped in the last 3 to 5 years, and make sure that you're asking for that clearance letter provided, and make sure that they're also inspecting the drain field lines. Drain fields are very expensive. There are inspectors out there. I know Steve Hanley being one of them. Georgia, what's his name, guys? Anybody help me out? Georgia Pine. If any of y'all know him, say his name or put it in chat. But Steve Hanley uses a camera, a sewer and septic tank camera. I strongly suggest that you do that, because using the sewer camera is very helpful, and they can see any problems that could arise later. So that's something I would certainly explain to them. It's like $200 or $300, but I would explain to them, I'd rather you spend $200 or $300 now than, have an issue 5 years from now, right? Because of something that could have been prevented. So be very cautious with that. And make sure you understand that they should be pumped every 3 to 5 years is the recommended time. Now, does anyone know how septics are, is it based on rooms or bathrooms? Anybody know?
Isn't it occupant?
No, it's not occupancy. It's rooms. It's based on rooms. Everyone, a lot of people seem to think it's based on bathrooms or occupancy. It's based on the amount of rooms. Don't over or under explain. Like I said before, stay in your lane. Be specific, like I've stated 1,000 times, and allow those actual professionals in those fields to do the inspections and the diagnosis. Do not walk around and say, oh, I see dry rot. Oh, I see mold. Oh, I see this. You guys are not inspectors. That's where liability can come in. If they ask you, what do you think? Say, let's ask the inspector. Don't try to get in that lane unless you yourself are an inspector. Don't do it. Just like I tell you, don't write special steps unless you're an attorney. Stay in your lane. Let the actual professionals do their job, and be very, very cautious. Now, looking underneath a sink and saying, I believe this is polybutylene. Sure, that you should know, and that you should do. But say, I think. Always use the words, I think. This could be. Don't be specific unless this is your field of expertise. Also, careful when you use licensed in your ATAC, because using the word licensed doesn't mean a whole lot in Georgia, because the only ones that have to be licensed are plumbers, electricians, and GCs, I believe. Roofers are not licensed. Handymen are obviously not licensed. I really have a giggle when I see licensed handyman. There is no such a thing unless you want them to make sure they drive a car. So make sure that don't overdo what you can't control anyway. And make sure you don't decide what the buyer or seller should decide. For example, don't waive the lead-based inspection. That is a big one that I see where people will waive it. Agents will waive it and send it to the buyer. Let the buyer decide what they want to do. Explain to them they have a federal law or federal right to have 10 days. So let me see something Eddie wrote. Deborah, what's the list? What if the listing agent wants to insist the usage of the county inspection report in place of a certified inspection when using a VA loan? It's the buyer's right. It's all over the contract. They can insist on doing whatever they want, but I would point them out right back to the contract that the buyer has every right to do what they want to do. So, I would probably call their broker if they kept insisting. And if they are the broker, then I would just point them out in the contract where you have the right, or not you, but the buyer has the right. Careful what you ask for. The more precise you are with repair amendments, the better your results will be. So, for example, what are the consequences of the actions you're requesting? Let's say I have a request on my ATAC that says, remove TV brackets from wall. What do you think is the danger in writing something like that? Anybody?
You didn't say repair the wall.
Correct. Yeah, I removed them. I followed what you asked. Make sure that if they're going to be removing brackets or removing ceiling fan or anything like that, that you're also addressing how it's going to be repaired. Or, if you say remove something repaired and painted to, so that it looks like nothing happened, right? You don't want big holes and mismatched paint. You want to use something more along the lines of remove TV brackets, repair, patch, texture, and paint to match current walls. Make sure the more detailed you are when it comes to that, there won't be an issue saying, well, you didn't explain it. So again, I already talked about the license part. Also, the other reason putting licensed in there is not really necessary is keep in mind the contract already addresses that all repairs must be done in good and workmanlike order. So it's already stated there. Same as must be cleaned. A lot of people put professionally cleaned. Well, again, it's already discussed in the contract that they have to deliver it cleaned. Less is more when it comes to stipulations and requests. Now, once you've written it, double check it and read it out loud, even bounce it off of somebody else, because one word could make a huge difference, right? And check for grammatical errors, because every single amendment you write is a reflection of you, your character, and your business. So even things like loose, that's a pet peeve of mine. If you're going to write loose, L-O-S-E, obviously it means something is loose. The faucet is loose. But if you say lose faucet, they're going to take out the faucet, right? Because L-O-S-E is lose, like get rid of. So check for grammatical errors. That's a big difference between lose and loose. So just understand, bounce it off of others. My husband has a big issue with spelling, so he bounces it out off of me and he says, did I write that correctly? And I'll be like, no, unless you want to lose the faucet. So just be very careful. And receipts or reports, make sure that if you're asking for receipts or reports that you're giving a time deadline. Don't just say must provide receipts or reports. Must provide paid receipt, not a paid work order, right? A paid receipt or report no later than, and give yourself some time prior to closing. Try to do like 5 days prior to closing. So that way you know that you've received it and everything has been repaired. And make sure you number your items. It just looks better when you number your items. If a listing agent has several different people that their offers, it's also going to make a psychological difference to the seller as they're reviewing offers to see what's easier to read, what's more concise. So even the same thing with an ATAC. Number your items, be concise, be grammatically and spelling correctly, and you're going to see that everything's going to go smoother. Throw in some non-deal killers. This is a negotiation tactic that I've always done. If there are some big ticket items that really are non-issue for your buyer, throw them in. For example, I had a client years back that her brother worked for a foundation repair company. And as we know, that's a very expensive repair, right? But for her, it was going to be cheap because her brother did it. So we threw that in as far as money payment for foundation repair in as closing costs, because we knew she could get it done. And she ended up getting some closing contributions because the sellers were like, I really don't want to deal with the foundation repair now anyway. So they gave them the money, and it was really, candy to her because her brother did it for free. So I always throw in, if there is a big ticket item like that, that's not an issue for your buyer, throw it in. And that way you can use it as a negotiation tool. So you can always ask your buyer. Now with warranties, if you're asking for a home warranty, specify which agent is going to order it, what price, what company, if you know it. I usually write, home warranty to be ordered by selling agent of company of buyer's choice up to X amount. That way, if you do use a company like APHW that gives you a referral fee to your brokerage, you can make sure that you're getting it and not the other agent. All right. So that's something that you want to specify: who, when, what price, and what company, if you know it. Now, this is a big one that I want to make sure we talk about: survival after closing. In the GAR contract, it's on page 7, section 4.0, where it talks about the 8 reasons something would survive. And we're going to go right to number 8. Any obligations which the parties herein agree shall survive the closing or may be performed or fulfilled after the closing. So let's say you put on your ATAC that a window was going to be replaced. And now it was 2 days before closing and it had not been replaced. Would that survive closing? No, it would not survive closing. And would your buyer have the right to not close? No, your buyer could be in default. So you want to make sure that you use that number 8 from the contract and make sure that it does survive closing. So we're going to talk about how you can make that survive. In the RE contracts, it's on 12.7. I just wanted to point out where it will be. There's one sentence that will create that number 8 of the GAR contract survive and make the seller responsible regardless of the closing having happened. And that's this sentence right here. This provision, or all provisions, shall survive closing. So that's the simple sentence that should be on all your ATACs. No matter what you write, no matter what you ask for, make sure you add that. This provision, or all provisions, shall survive closing. Now, let's make sure you understand how due diligence works, because I don't know why, but I see a lot of people having problems with writing or figuring out the due diligence. So if binding is on Monday the 1st, day 0 is binding date. So 5 days of due diligence would end Saturday the 6th. I'm sure not all of you have that issue, but I wanted to put it real simply. That was, that to me, just think of binding date as being day 0. And of course, delivery of the amendment. Make sure that everybody has those amendments once they've been signed, right? And if due diligence ends on the 6th and you decide to send it on the 6th, just like we started the conversation earlier, then unless it's signed by the end of that night, and it's midnight, not business hours, unless you specify business hours, the buyer has accepted the contract as is. So be very careful if you're going to send it at the very last minute. And I've done that for negotiating purposes. Make sure you also add in there that if this agreement is not signed by midnight, the buyer is terminating the contract, and I follow up with a unilateral termination. So that is how you want to make sure to protect your buyer. Because if you decide to send it at 10 o'clock at night and the seller didn't sign it, and the next day the buyer says, okay, they're going to fix everything, the seller can easily say, nope, we're not fixing a thing. It doesn't matter if they emailed you, texted you, nothing. Unless it was a signed agreement, your buyer has chosen to buy that house as is. and make sure you have that conversation with your buyer early on so that they don't get mad at you. And of course, that conversation should be followed up by in writing. So make sure that every lender, every attorney, all parties involved have that amendment once signed. So obviously, a lot of it's probably basic things that you already knew, but I wanted to double check and make sure that I really talked about those things. Now, on a completely different note, and then I'll be open to questions, I want to ask you guys, does anyone need headshots? Because we're going to be doing headshot sessions and they're open to any agent. It doesn't matter if you're with our office or not. You can go to max1training.com and sign up for it. It's $90 for a 25-minute session, and they will provide you with all of your digital shots that you can use. It's being done by a professional photographer. And then the next question I have for you is if you like tacos, because we're going to be doing a realtor and real estate agent appreciation lunch, which I have been allowed to invite all my compliance chat friends, which is going to be at the Duluth office. Don't worry, no one's going to be trying to recruit you, nothing like that. It's just realtor and real estate agent appreciation. It is going to be from 12 to 2, and we have a street taco car, van, whatever they're called, food truck. And we're going to have games, fun, food, prizes, all sorts of things. So I would love to see you guys, meet you guys in person. Also on the website, this website right here, max1training.com, I've uploaded about 6 or 7 of the last compliance chats, the recordings and the PowerPoints, and that's where I'll add this one as well. And here is my information if anyone needs anything. And then I'm going to stop sharing my screen and ask you guys some questions or see if you guys have any questions. All right, guys. So any questions, comments, whether about this conversation or anything else? Wow, we're really
I have a
quiet.
question.
Sure.
I have a question, Deborah.
Absolutely.
Okay, so after due diligence ends, day 1 after, they should be using that other form, not the amendment to address concerns.
Say that again.
So after your due diligence period ends and you're still trying to request repairs, you should be using the right to request repairs, or what
Mm-mm.
should they use if it's after due diligence?
If it's after due diligence, your buyer bought it as is.
Okay.
Yeah, you're up a creek without a paddle.
Gotcha.
So are you saying though, Deborah, that let's just say that the agent does miss the deadline for argument's sake. So it's no longer an ATAC because we're out of that. But the 2 agents say, you know what, just put it on a regular amendment and let's see what my seller can do. Then you can.
You can. Yeah, you can always amend anything, but it would be a regular amendment. The right to request repairs would only be if there's no due diligence from the beginning and you did a right to request, you did it with it right to inspect.
Okay.
Instead of due diligence. Any other questions, comments about this or anything? And I would love to see you guys over at the Realtor Appreciation, or if you need headshots, like I said, that's a really good price to get 25 minutes. They'll also do team pictures if you want to do team pictures.
Okay.
So Deborah, I have a question.
Sure.
Can you repeat what you said about the septic portion of it, where you normally request them? I think you said for them to drain and scope and inspect.
Normally what I normally request is pumped,
Okay.
pumped, inspected, and clearance letter.
Gotcha. Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Trying to catch up with Scott to relieve some of his angst.
Yeah,
Yeah, you going up there?
no, I'm just
Oh.
going into the shade to talk to you.
Oh, you're good.
I muted him. Any other questions, concerns, comments?
Deborah, I have a question.
Sure.
About the septic tank is now available, because I have a friend in Beaufort, Georgia that has septic. She has 5-bedroom, but the septic is only 1,000 gallons for 3 bedrooms. What do you recommend? for a situation like that in terms of listing a house?
Wow. That could be problematic. Again, I'm going to stay in my lane on that one. I would say I would call a septic tank company
Mm-hmm.
and try to find out what they might have to get a second one. Yeah, we
Well-
do need a septic tank class, Eddie. I've been actually trying to work on one from a septic tank company. But yeah, I would say, Yolanda, I would call a septic tank company. They probably are going to need to add a second tank.
What about if sewer is available?
They could certainly connect to sewer. And because especially if sewer is available and they're trying to sell FHA, FHA is most likely going to require that. But like I said, that can get costly. It can be anywhere from 2,500 to in Beaufort, it could be up to 10,000.
I
You know.
know my potential client mentioned 50,000, but that sounds a little bit overrated. I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, I've never heard it be that high, but again, it depends how far away the sewer is. So that's something but I believe, and you could call planning and zoning. Sometimes they'll give you some tax breaks and things like that if you're connecting.
Right. Okay.
But yeah, that's a great question. Thank you for asking that. But I would certainly, I would refer that to a septic tank inspector or septic tank company. And yes, Eddie, I'm going to see if I can find a septic tank person to come on one of the compliance chats and at least give us some lessons on what to look for. Any
you.
other questions, comments, this or anything?
Yes, I have a question, Deborah. What was the difference between F704 and F722?
Sure, good question. F704 is the amendment to address concerns. So that's what you would use if you have a due diligence period. If you have right to request and you did not have a due diligence period, then you would use the other form, which is just terminating your right to your right to inspect. So right to inspect is due diligence. Just understand due diligence, you can back out for anything, right? You woke up on the wrong side of the bed and you can back out. Right to inspect, you have to ask for specific repairs. So that's
Right
the
to
difference.
inspect. Okay.
And you
So
cannot
after-
use the
So
722 on due diligence.
you lose your due diligence if you do the right to inspect.
You don't have due diligence. There never was.
Okay, gotcha.
Two totally separate items. All right. So who am I going to see next week at any of my classes or hopefully in August for our taco day? Raise your hands. Yay. All right, guys. Well, it's been great. I look forward to seeing you guys at some of my classes and also at Compliance Chat next week. And again, max1training.com. If you have any other questions, I'll stay on for a minute or two longer. I want to respect your time. So go ahead and go and have a fabulous, fabulous day.
I have a question.
Sure.
It's dealing with the that denial letter with the agent.
Mm-hmm.
So I spoke to her. Well, what I did was I looked at the title company because I was wondering what was going on with it. Early on in the contract, I thought she might have had a personal, like the relationship of the townhouse she was selling wasn't at arm's length.
Mm-hmm.
So when I researched and looked up the connection with Jenkins,